وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. My brothers here and anyone joining us at home. It's a pleasure to be with you. Thanks to Imam Hassan for inviting me. Thank you all for being here, spending your night with us tonight, inshallah. To quickly introduce myself, my name is Cyrus McGoldrick. I'm visiting from Istanbul. I was born and raised in the U.S. I'm of Iranian Irish descent. Went to school here and worked here for a long time. But since 2015, I've been living with my family in Istanbul, studying and working from there, and trying to develop further, inshallah, try to be of better service. Before that, most of my work was in, let's call it Islamic political work, Islamic social work, movement work, and working for a number of organizations, trying to meet some immediate needs, beginning with civil rights work and then human rights work. And in the process, it felt more and more important to solidify the Islamic basis for the work that we were doing. And this is the process that sent me back to my studies, and it's the process that I'd love to spend tonight and tomorrow kind of working through with you guys. Inshallah, the hope is, the plan is that we'll have some time tonight, and then we'll also have some more time tomorrow night, inshallah, with your permission. And so what we can do is begin tonight, what I hope is that there will be some continuity then, from tonight into tomorrow. I hope that we'll be somewhat flexible. I want to bring up some topics that if and when you want to discuss them, we can discuss them. If you have questions, we can discuss them further. I'm happy to do that. And just to make sure that we cover some important territory, I did prepare some notes and I have an outline to go through, but inshallah, whatever is best, whatever's most useful, I'll follow your lead as well. I have to apologize also. My voice doesn't usually sound like this. I just came up from Miami. I did a teach-in for some organizers, Muslims organizing around Palestine in the Miami area in South Florida. We did that teach-in while fasting, and about halfway through a 4-hour session, my voice went, and it has not come back since. But so please forgive me for this. I hope I'm clear, and inshallah, Allah give me strength to get through tonight and tomorrow, inshallah. I'll give you the ending first, because bring it closer then. Okay, bismillah. Something like this. I'm going to give you the ending first, because I want to begin with something of an Islamic narrative, that underpins what we do. And there's going to be times when I expect it to sound basic to you, and my intention behind that, is not to preach to you or teach something that you don't know, but rather to describe or to demonstrate, a way of thinking about our place in the history of humankind, in the history of the creation of Allah, as a member of this ummah, right? A narrative that facilitates a unity among the ummah, a strong a sense of our ethics, a strong sense of Islamic ethics, a sense of our goals, meaning what we're striving towards, and then we're going to try to build up to a point of developing a strategy for how we might get to those goals. Okay, those last three things are important, and they're things that maybe it's the first thing that you can tuck away. That what we do, whether we're talking about politics, but really anything that you're working on, I like to try to spell out, or I suggest that you try to spell out for yourself first the ethics, of what it is that you're doing, the right and the wrong, of what it is that you're trying to do. 2, the goals that you're striving for. Really nail that down, really spell that out for yourself if you have a specific goal to work towards. And 3, then, the strategy, which is how to get there. The ethics, the goals, and the strategies, whatever it is that you're working on. The ethics, the goals, and strategies. If you have a leader, like if you have a political leader, someone calling you to sign up for something, trying to rally you for something, you want to have a sense of what are their ethics, what are their goals, and what are their strategies. And then you'll have a better sense of if this is how you fit into that vision, if you share this vision yourself. Okay, bismillah. To the first point, at 2 points at least, from the creation of Adam, alayhi salam, our greatest, forefather. Also again, after the saving of the Ark of Noah, alayhi salam. All of humankind, all of us, have begun from common parents. Does that make sense? Every single one of us all go back to common parents. That's true for all humans, not just all of us who we already feel some affinity for each other, but all human beings come from a common parents before then spreading out again and diversifying. Now, the tribes that develop, those tribes which are either like based on our bloodline, or the tribes that are formed by geography, by being close together, these of course do take on certain qualities. They develop, and the differences, that they take on, and these are more or less familiar to us. But our humanity, what makes us human, is based on 2 very fundamental things. Some of our scholars of the spiritual, of Islamic psychology, break it into 2 kind of competing, complementary, but also sometimes competing instincts. One, our animalistic impulses, our biological impulse, and then our angelic, or our spiritual impulse. The animal, the former, is our biological, is the impulse to eat, the impulse to find shelter, the impulse to reproduce, these things that many of the creations of Allah, have this in us. But humans also have this angelic impulse as well, this social impulse as well. This seeking, this innate fitraic, to combine the Arabic with the English, I apologize for that, a desire, an innate, desire to find our Lord, to connect with our Creator. All humans, of course, we have differences in our mental abilities and our physical abilities, and that's fine. But we're all essentially the same. And it's important, and I'd say this because every single one of us, has a capacity for the best of creation, and we have a capacity for the worst. And I say that to remind myself and you to have empathy. You know what empathy means? Like to have, to understand, to even have a love, for everyone and where they are on their journeys. By remembering that everything bad that we see people do, it could have been us. We have that capacity in us. Any sin and any crime, that could have been us that committed it, if we had been prepared for that moment in that way. May Allah protect us from that. Amen. Now, Allah sent to this human creation, thousands of prophets and warners calling people to worship the Creator of all, to connect with Him, to not worship anything else that's created. Don't worship things that you make. Don't worship human beings. Don't worship yourself. Don't worship an identity. Of course, that true worship is corrupted from time to time. As you look at the history of human beings, that prophecy would be followed or would be challenged by misguidance, either from within human beings, from the shayateen, among jinn and men. Some, after a number of previous communities being just wiped out, actually. A number of times human communities are wiped out by Allah. Allah reminds us in the Quran of the many nations, that they are forgotten. But there comes a point, a turning point in history, where Allah leaves communities that even if they continue to transgress, and the Bani Israel, are the famous example, and the people that call themselves Christians, are the famous example. These are I won't even say the followers of Musa and Isa, but the people who claim those traditions. Those previous prophets, it's worth noting, that those previous prophets are lost to the historical record, the way the historians understand history today. Jews and Christians today, they're challenged, they have an interesting challenge, that they are not able to place Isa alayhi salam, in a historical record, like to say with certainty that he really existed. Alhamdulillah, Muslims don't have this problem because of our belief, and this is a rational belief in the Quran, our belief in the prophecy of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. We believe with certainty. We know that Isa existed because Allah told us so. And because the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, told us so. We know that Musa alayhi salam exists. We know that Ibrahim alayhi salam existed, and all the prophets and warners that were mentioned. But there's something special about the fact that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, is in the historical record in a way that's irrefutable. No, even an enemy of Islam, even someone who challenges our deen in every way that they can think of, is not really able to make the case that the Prophet Muhammad did not exist. It's just not possible. The historical record, the time of his appearance, by Allah's wisdom, by His divine plan, the time that the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam is placed, is at the beginning of a time when when humans are able to record, and he's sent to a community that has certain skills and has the nature of that community, that is able to protect the tradition, is able to protect the revelation without any change, such that the Quran is able to reach us today by Allah's grace, by Allah's protection, as He promised, but through the efforts of humans, through the efforts of our pious predecessors, that Quran is able to reach us today without any change to it. And that the prophetic sunnah, the prophetic practice, is also able to reach us today with just mashallah, such an ihsan, like such an excellent detail. The science is really tremendous, such that we know so much of what the Prophet ﷺ said. We know what he did. We know often what he didn't say, what he didn't do, in certain situations when that was important to the people around him that observed him. And so we thank Allah for this guidance. Every single one of us, any of you here, we should thank Allah. Be just grateful that we have this, that whether we were born into this or whether you found it for yourself at some point. And even if you were born into this, even if your parents, taught you this, from a young age, and that's a tremendous blessing itself. For you to be here and for you to practice this deen, and when no one else is looking, for you to maintain your worship and for you to keep yourself, free from sins and mistakes, this is a tremendous gift. For us to be here on one of these special nights at the end of Ramadan, these are, to be here in a masjid, instead of someplace else, this is a tremendous gift, so we thank Allah for that. And we focus then on protecting that practice. These disciplines that we take on as Muslims, as adults, as young adults. All of you are young adults. You guys are young men. This practice that we take on ourselves, let's protect that. It's a discipline. It's a technology that we take on to fashion ourselves, like to make ourselves into something. And it's a reminder then to be careful of habits. It's a reminder to be careful of the people that we surround ourselves with. And alhamdulillah, I feel the joy of having such good company in this space. Alhamdulillah. Now we are born and raised, and people raise us, our parents and our families and our communities raise us, and we go out into the world and people pressure us to become this way or that way. Most people, I think, maybe not most, I'll say many people don't ask questions about the way that they were raised. They don't ask why. They don't seek to, they don't try to, certify what it is that they've been taught. This is a blind faith. There's an archetype here of the often repeated kind of quote in the Quran of, this is what we found our fathers doing. Now, if you're a Muslim and you come from a Muslim family, of course there's a beauty in having pious parents, that you can follow and that you can learn from. But we want to ask questions, crucial questions, make sure that our faith becomes firm. That we don't just believe in Allah because most of the people around us seem to, think so, or because it's socially convenient. We want to ask the questions to really solidify our faith. Now, actually, I jumped ahead though. Part of that social pressure, maybe we'll talk about this more later on or tomorrow, but part of that social pressure and the impact of that social pressure on people, the fact that so many people are raised with social pressure upon them to become this way or that way, is one of the reasons that the Prophet ﷺ and his companions and his family prioritized not just personal practice, but also developing an Islamic society, developing an Islamic community. It's not just enough to, leave your tribe and village and just work on yourself, become a monk. That's not our way. It's not the prophetic way. It is to purify yourself, it is to work on yourself, but to then be a man of your community, or be a person of your community, to raise your family, to raise your friends with you, to raise your community, your neighborhood, your village, your city with you, to develop them and institute, really. It's not just, you don't just pray, but you establish the prayer. You don't just give the charity, but you order the charity and you collect the charity and distribute it. You don't just know the haqq, but you call to the haqq, but you call people to the truth. Rectifying society, trying to improve society, it's also an obligation at some level on us. Maybe a fard kifaya, maybe a communal obligation, something that someone has to do, but also at some level something that we all have to do. And the intention of this is the Islamic spirit of this is what we call Khalifa. You guys know what the word Khalifa is? What does that mean to you?
Successor.
Successorship, yeah, that's a big part of it. Yeah. Literally, yeah, the linguistic meaning has to do with who's in the Quran, who is referred to as a Khalifa, Oh, Abu Bakr. Oh, yes, exactly. Abu Bakr is the Khalifa of Rasulullah. He's the successor of the Prophet ﷺ, and he's the first then political leader. But even before that, in the Quran, in Baqarah, I'll put it this way. Let me start here. In the book of Genesis, in the Old Testament of the Bible, the way it's translated into English today, the King James Version, Allah protect us from a king's version of a sacred text, subhanAllah. But the Adam alayhi salam is given, Adam is given dominion of the earth. And this is the way the Bible talks about the role of Adam in the earth. Adam is given dominion. Dominion, I would say in Arabic would be mulk. Right? Mulk is in our understanding, mulk is for Allah. Humans aren't given dominion of the earth. This whole thing, yes, it's at our service in a way, but Adam alayhi salam is made a Khalifa. Allah says when he announces to the angels, he says, I'm going to create on the earth a Khalifa on the earth. And Khilafah doesn't have that same connotation, of control. Allah's in control. Allah owns the earth. To be a Khalifa, the way Abu Bakr was, of the community of the Prophet, when Abu Bakr is made the Khalifa, over the Ummah of the Prophet ﷺ, it is, you are successor in caretaking, in stewardship, in service, the vicegerent. It's, if you're a Khalifa of something, you're supposed to take care of it as long as you have it, and the next person to follow you is then inherits a responsibility for something. It's different than control. We're not rulers, we're not kings, we're khulafa. And the hadith about governance, when the Prophet ﷺ predicts correctly, that righteous Khalifa would continue after his passing for 30 years, after which it will be followed by monarchies, by kingships. It implies there's a difference between these two things. There's a difference between Khilafah and kingship. That intention of service informs how Muslims govern this type of society and the type of community leadership, the type of Islamic leadership that we want to develop. It's not about controlling people. It's about helping people. It's about helping them connect with Allah. Removing the barriers, removing the veils, that arise between people and their Lord. Many people, as they get older, they have these barriers. They have these things blocking them, blocking their vision. Things are unclear to them. There are questions. Questions are okay, I guess, because if they find answers. But there's ignorances, that people don't want to break through. Sometimes it's just bad habits. These are veils. Sometimes oppression, sometimes poverty. These become veils between people and their Lord. Right? And so Khilafah is about solving not just personal problems, but social problems, to help make it easier for people. This is why conquest, when Islam spread, what's the word? The word that's used in the history books when Mecca, for example. This is an easy one. In the Sirah, there's an Arabic word that's used when the Muslims re-enter Mecca victoriously. You know the word? Hijrah is a super important concept. I'm going to get to the Hijrah for sure. I had in mind Fat Makkah. Because Fat, like Fatiha, it has to do with opening. You're opening a place for Islam, And I think that's an important distinction. It's not about conquering it to own it, It's about opening a place so that Islam can enter, so that Islam and light can go into people's hearts. Those after Mecca, those empires, that the Sahaba went to war against and defeated, were places of darkness. I mean, these were places where there were barriers placed by the rulers between people and their Lord, And so when these were opened, the Futuhat, of the Persian Empire, the Futuhat, into the Roman Empire, which took a longer time. These facilitated social transformations, and those transformations, you see it until today. The openings, the futuhat of the Sahaba, were never reversed. Of course, later on we take some wins and losses, but those became solid, alhamdulillah. Now, we could talk more about politics later. I just wanted to do something more personal first. Some of you in high school or university or just in personal study, whatever, you don't have to leave this to school. In fact, you shouldn't. But as you are trying to make your faith strong, trying to learn about the world, maybe in school you have to take a philosophy course, or maybe you're just interested. You want to look at the history of ideas. You want to look at the history of human thought. You want to look at the diversity of human thought. What do people believe? What do people think? What are the arguments that they make? You're going to find that most questions, maybe all the questions, can be broken down into three parts. Go into three categories, let's put it that way. And these questions are linked. The first question is, what is true? Second question is, how do I know? The third question is, what does that mean for me? What do I have to do about it? Okay. I'm saving you like years of philosophical instruction right now. This is like, it's big. Just tuck those little things away. What's real? How do I know? What do I have to do about it? For you older guys who have touched philosophy at all, maybe someone at I know we have another group on the live stream, inshallah. You know, the first is ontology and metaphysics. Excuse me. What's real? You know, am I real? Is my physical body real, or is it just a figment of my imagination? You know, is the law real, or is the law? Is that a figment of someone's imagination? Is everything just perception? You know, am I dreaming right now? You know, these are the type of the questions that Western philosophers got really stuck on, even until the present day. You know, they really aren't able to kind of lock this down. Two, how do I know? Is epistemology. How do you actually know what you know? How do you know you're not dreaming right now? How do you know you're not dreaming right now? How do you know I'm in front of you? Could I just be a character in your dream? You know? We have an idea. You know, we can work that out. And three, then, what do I have to do about it? Based on what's real and how I know it's real, this then might obligate us to do certain things. This is ethics and this is aesthetics. You know, what's good and bad, what's good and evil. You know, what's beautiful and what's ugly. These things are also related to what's real and how do I know, at least in our tradition. In Western tradition, they try to split ethics away from what's real and how we know. They just kind of make it up, you know, try to argue from some other principles. Anyway, I'm going to cut ahead, but that was a real big philosophy lesson for you. Now, alhamdulillah, I know and you know with certainty that Allah, God, the one God, the one divine source, the one divine creator of all things is real. That He's one, that He's the creator, He's the sustainer of all things. That He revealed knowledge to who He willed, culminating in the Quran and the prophetic Sunnah. Which reach us, the Quran and the prophetic Sunnah now reach us as a rich intellectual tradition. Which we, I'll say, I don't know who's listening in, but this is a Sunni, you know, intellectual tradition that has within it methods and then the details to help us reach a coherent life. What's generally agreed upon, across time, and to live a generally coherent way of life. Okay. Now, there are many different voices, and more so now than ever. There are many different voices claiming an authority for their take on Islam. And if you go online or if you go from place to place, you'll find that some of these different voices claim sometimes contradictory things. Sometimes really opposite things. For example, extreme case might be, one voice might say, you might hear an authority say, or you'll find it in a book that suggests that the best way of life is to leave the world, to go in seclusion, to hide out and just worship all the time, just to be in constant dhikr. You find this in some of the books, in some books. And then on the other hand, so you might find that condemned, say that there's no place for this, that the best life is to be in constant service. Minimize your worship, be in constant service to people. Some people go further than that, say that ibadah, is unimportant. My point being, these are extreme cases. My suggestion is, I think you would find that the truth is in the middle of this, but why? How do we know that? My suggestion is that we find the truth about Islam by looking at how the Prophet ﷺ understood Islam. And we don't have to make it up as we go. If we hear something today, you see something online that sounds cool to you, maybe it sounds kind of provocative. What do you judge it against to know if this person's right? People could be good at talking. people could be great at writing and be very convincing, you know. Some people just look cool, you know. Some people just give you a good vibe, and it makes you more likely to take what they're saying seriously. But what do you have to take what they say and rate it against something? Like, how do you judge it? And you can judge it against the way that the Prophet ﷺ understood Islam. Maybe these people will claim that this is based on what the Prophet ﷺ did or said. I think the next level then is you have to look at how did the people closest to the Prophet ﷺ understand what he did and said. How did they understand what the Prophet was teaching them? Right? Who are the people that spent the most time with him? Right? The Sahaba. May Allah be pleased with them all. His family, you know, his wives and his children. The angels. Yeah, the angels too, of course, yes. And actually that's a great point too, because it makes me think of the hadith of Jibreel, alayhi salam, you know, on that idea level, right? The Prophet ﷺ says about the hadith that Jibreel came to teach you your deen, like breaks down, you know, Iman. Do you know this hadith? You've probably gone through the 40 hadith of Imam Nawawi. I guess we could do it. Anyone not heard that hadith? Should we run it real quick? No, let's just do it, to remind ourselves. The Omar ibn Khattab, one of the closest companions of the Prophet ﷺ, is sitting with the Prophet ﷺ one day. He narrates later that a man approached their group while they were sitting with the Prophet ﷺ. And this man, and they're in Medina, this man approached and no one recognized him. Remember, Medina's not like a huge city like it is today. Medina's like a village. You know, they know everyone in town. If someone comes from outside the city, they're going to know. Man approached, no one recognizes him. Omar says, we did not know him. And he had no marks of travel on him. You know, he was wearing white. His clothes were very white. And he's not dirty, not dusty, you know. He said his hair was very black. And he came up to the Prophet ﷺ and sat very close to him. Like literally the text is like his knees touched his knees. I mean, anyway, he's right in front of the Prophet. He comes very close to the Prophet ﷺ. And he says, Rasulullah, teach me about Islam. And the Prophet ﷺ says that, you know, Islam is to testify, like the Shahada, to testify, bear witness, you know, in the oneness of Allah and Muhammad as a messenger, to pray, salah, to give the charity, you know, to pay the obligatory charity on your wealth, to make the Hajj if you're able, right? And, Shahada, Salah, Zakah, the fasting, excuse me, and then to make the fast Ramadan, and then to make the Hajj if you're able. And this guest, his visitor says, you've spoken correctly, like this is correct. And Omar's like, who's this guy telling the Prophet that he's correct? He asked a question, and then he's like, we thought it was strange that someone would ask the Prophet a question and then say that, you know, the answer is correct. The guy said, then he says, now tell me about Iman. What's Iman? Faith. And the Prophet is belief in Allah, you know, the books, the angels, you know, the prophets, the destiny, you know, and the last day. I think I messed up the order, excuse me, but this is faith, you know. And again, the man says this is correct. He says, tell me about ihsan. Ihsan is a beautiful word. Usually, sometimes it has a connotation of beauty, but also like excellence. You say ihsan, like you did excellently. Tell me about ihsan. Prophet ﷺ says, it is to worship Allah as if you can see Him. when you're worshiping, like you're doing it as if you could see Allah. Because even though you can't see Him, Allah can see you. It's that. Then the guest asks the Prophet ﷺ, tell me about the hour, meaning like the end of times. The Prophet ﷺ says to him, he says, the one who's asking, like, knows as much as the one who's being asked. Like, basically saying, like, I don't know, like, neither of us, he's saying neither of us know, about the last hour or when it's coming. So the man says, then tell me its signs. The Prophet ﷺ gives two. That two of its signs are, one is that the slave girl will give birth to her master. And the time will come when you will see like barefoot Bedouins, like barefoot shepherds competing in building tall buildings. Those two of the signs. And unless I'm missing something at that point, that at that point the guest gets up and leaves. Omar said, they sat quietly for a moment. The Prophet ﷺ turned to him and asked, he says, do you know who that was? That was just with us. And he said, Allah's messenger know best, And he said, that was Jibreel. That was the angel Jibreel who came to teach you your deen, to teach you your way. Thank you for that reminder. That subhanAllah. Like, we think about very materially, we think about the Prophet and the Sahaba as, but the Sahaba benefited from, the Prophet of course, but the Sahaba also benefited from the angels directly, in this way, from time to time. There's a lot to that. That's not the subject, necessarily of this day, but it's a beautiful hadith that's kind of comprehensive, in a way. The Sahaba, took the teachings of the Prophet ﷺ. They were developed by the Prophet ﷺ. The way that we spend time with our imams, and our teachers, and our leaders, developing us, the Sahaba had the Prophet ﷺ, and his children, and his grandchildren, had the Prophet ﷺ. He was their murabbi, like he was their guide, he taught them directly, he gave them what they needed to build them into like the greatest people, the greatest generation, ever since. And so I suggest, this is my argument, is that this is my understanding of Islam, this is what we're taught, that the best way, to know the correct practice of Islam, the best practice of Islam, is to look at the way that the inheritors of the Prophet, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the way that they understood Islam. What are the priorities of Islam? It seems like there could be many. You have a lot of people, everyone justifies what they do according to something that they heard, but how did they understand what the priorities of Islam are? How did they live their lives? Did they go and retreat, into a cave and, and just focus only on worship? Not really. Did they retreat only into study? That's another one, That's I should have mentioned that earlier. That's one of the narratives sometimes, that the best life is only study and don't do anything else. That's not really what the Sahaba did. They studied, they learned everything they could, they soaked up all the knowledge that they could, but that wasn't the most urgent priority for all of them. They wanted to preserve the deen and pass it on. Yes. But they went out. They established Islam in their homes. They established Islam in the village. They made money, enough to live, but they lived very simply, and spent the rest for the pleasure of Allah. They spent the rest of it giving. They spent the rest of it to expand Islam, to open the rest of the world. Most of them just set out and never went home. They went out to spread Islam to the rest, every corner of the world. That generation, they really didn't focus much on building buildings. They built people. They built nations. And I suggest, that we're at kind of a weird time in history. It's a good time to renew those priorities, perhaps. The Sahaba did not. This is a trope, right? Often that sometimes we hear that Islam was spread by the sword, and it's a little more complicated. The Sahaba never forced people to accept Islam by the sword. They didn't convert people by the sword. That's not our way. But they did open lands with the sword, and we should not ever be embarrassed about that. We should not be, shy about that, or definitely not deny it. I mean, this is just a historical fact. The Sahaba went out and they fought the enemies of Allah. And they ruled justly. They were not oppressors. They didn't violate people's rights. They were very careful to always treat people gently. And as I said, after 30 years of righteous Khalifa, of course, dynasties took over, and it had its shortcomings, but it also had its successes. Muslims were always, really, ever since then, Muslims always were unified under a Muslim ruler. At some point, sometimes there was more than one, sometimes there were competing rulers, but for most of our history, there was a Muslim ruler or a claimant to it, that at least spiritually, psychologically, united the Muslims, into a body. That leader, having such a leader, facilitates the obligations that we have. Like I said, it's not just about prayer, but establishing the prayer. Not just charity, establishing, the charity. It's not just, personal struggle, but calling the people and organizing the people towards that struggle. There are two periods in history. I don't know if you guys are into history. Definitely encourage you to study Islamic history. All history is very interesting. We learn from that. I love history. It's stories of our ancestors. It's important that you know where we come from, to understand yourself, and to understand where we might go. Two periods in Islamic history when there was no Khalifa, when there was no Imam, for the Muslims. Any ideas when that might be? Yeah, that's great. Yeah, awesome. Yeah. That's the punchline. You stole my punchlines right now. Absolutely, right now. It's been exactly 100 years. From 1924 to 2024. It's been 100 solar years. Before that, the only time that I'm aware of is 2 years. With the Mongols, the sacking of Baghdad, 1258. Yeah. The Mongols, when they sacked Baghdad, they executed the Khalifa. The Muslims at the time thought the world was over. Like when you read those books, they thought this is it. This is the end times. Stories are horrific. And there's a great book for, especially for the college students. There's a interesting book called by Mona Hassan, some woman. It's an academic book. It's called "Longing for the Lost Caliphate." It's an academic book, but very interesting. And she collects literature from these two periods, basically. From literally, it's divided like that. Those 2 years are like after the fall of Baghdad in 1258, and then the years after the abolition of the Ottoman Caliphate in 1924. And she looks at the Muslim reactions to those times. How did the Muslims perceive that when it happened? And she makes the case that, based on the literature, she's not making it up. And she doesn't strike me as a political person. She's just telling you what it says. That it was a trauma. It was a trauma for the Ummah when this happened. It's interesting that we're so far from it 100 years later that most of us, we were born and raised, and we don't really miss it because we don't really know, what to miss. We don't really know, its importance, of having such a leader. None of us remember a time with one, but these were traumas, and it's important to know, to understand that, that, the scholars of Islam at those times were stunned by this, were horrified by this, and then immediately set about trying to fix it. In both cases, in the 1920s into the 30s, I mean, there were conferences, there were meetings. People were jockeying for this position. They were trying to kind of reconstitute this. They were trying to, how do we put this back together? Turkey's lost, but how do we get this back together? And it didn't work for various reasons, and that's also discussed in the book. It was a disaster then, and it still is. As a result of that, it's like a shield being dropped. We could definitely discuss how useful those caliphs were. In both cases, it's interesting. I mean, there were declines kind of that led to this. The late Abbasid period, into the 1200s. It was, there were weaknesses that caused this to happen. The late Ottoman, caliphate, there were weaknesses. There were things that that were going wrong that caused this to happen. It's interesting that the Ottoman caliphate was abolished not by an outside enemy. It wasn't like, there was an external invasion, but those invaders didn't think that they would get rid of the caliph. They didn't think that they would get rid of the Khalifa. This was an internal enemy. This was a Turk, who led this abolition of this caliph. This is Mustafa Kemal, who they gave the name Ataturk. And to this day, I live in Turkey. I've lived in Turkey 9 years, and if I insulted him, maybe even what I just said, I'm not even sure if that's too far, but if I insulted him today in Turkey, I could be arrested and deported. It's still part of the law, like there. He's like a saintly figure to the secular state. It's a crazy situation, actually. With that shield, with that division, there's a scattering. There's a mental scattering, like a spiritual scattering of people. These are now, okay, with this last one, we're talking about our grandparents, our great-grandparents. Really, for you guys, your great-grandparents' generation. People start to divide. Nationalisms become important. You know what nationalism is? Like, the way my father explained nationalism to me when I was young was, it's like patriotism, but worse. It's like, it's when you take the identity, like your political group, like, and it just becomes like too important to you. What's that? Nazis is a great example. Nazism is a great example, and Americanism, is a particularly violent example. America's killed more people in the last 20 years than the Nazis ever did. The Turkey, has a very, really deep nationalism. Point being, actually, every country in the world, is built around a nationalism. The nation state, the idea that a country is a land with a border, around it, and that the government controls everything, about the lives of the people within it. This is a new kind of, relatively, in human history, this is a relatively new way of dividing people. It's not a natural thing. Nationalism is not something we have to defer to. But it happened. And the way it came into the Muslim world was it divided Muslims from each other. So within a generation, Muslims might care more about being Egyptian, or Indonesian, or Syrian. I'm Syrian, not Jordanian. I'm Indonesian, not Malaysian. I'm Pakistani, or Indian, not Bangladeshi. Whatever it is. I know, and there's obviously a lot of complications here, and then wars were fought. I don't mean to make light of a really difficult century that we've all had. There were times when those nationalisms felt like good vehicles to free a piece of Muslim land from a foreign occupier. Sometimes they were useful. And I think Palestinian nationalism can sometimes we think about it that way too. The Palestinian cause. It's a Muslim cause, right? It's part of the Muslim Ummah that needs to be freed from a foreign occupier, right? But the Palestinian identity is one of the things, it's a type of asabiya that gives that people strength, to unite against that occupier. There's pros and cons to this, of course. I'd love to discuss that more. there's that fracturing, there's that splintering, and okay, this will bring us to. I'm going to wrap up soon, and then we could just discuss kind of whatever is what you find useful here, because then we're going to save some things for tomorrow also. But there was also a physical distancing. It's not just Muslims got divided in the mind, and got divided in the heart, but really for the first time, Muslims just left the Muslim world. Not, thinking of themselves as representatives of Dar al-Islam, maybe going out for trade or, going out under the banners, to fight the wars and whatever. But Muslims just like giving up on it, going out just looking for a better life someplace in the West. I'm not demonizing it, I'm not saying that to insult, whatever of our ancestors, came either to this place or wherever they went. I can, it must have been a very confusing time. It was a very difficult time. Those lands, either under colonization or right after decolonization, they were underdeveloped. They were abused and impoverished. Sometimes there was chaos. There was political chaos. There was oppression. So I'm not, this is not to second guess them. I'm just narrating what happened. Muslims went out into the world. And many of them, those that came to America, and this will be, will kind of give us a lane, to discuss more specifically, because this is relevant to us. What's our place here? What do we do here? I'd love to discuss as we go forward, probably into tomorrow, inshallah. I hope you guys will be here as well. Are you guys all in Itikaf here? Because are you a captive audience? So when I come back tomorrow, you're still going to be here. Well, anyone tuning in, I hope you join us again tomorrow, inshallah. Same time and place. As Americans or as residents of America, particularly, what's our role here? It's a great thing for us to discuss. The Muslims that came from overseas in that generation, when they came here, they found, very interestingly, the descendants of other Muslims who came by a very different route. They found the descendants of enslaved Africans, who, they were brought here. I mean, many of them were Muslims. These were Africans who were kidnapped from their homes, brought here, forced to work, tortured and abused, for generations. If you haven't, I don't expect you learned it in school very well. I mean, you learn about it, but they don't really teach you the, Yeah, and they say, it ends with the Civil War. And yeah, exactly. It's just kind of like this kind of footnote to this. And usually it's discussed in this idea of American progress. It's in the past. We got better. America got better. History is more complicated than that. But it's interesting to think about, and I know they don't teach this in school, because one of my jobs is I edit these textbooks. They don't teach you how many of those enslaved Africans were Muslims. Interestingly, those enslavers, these Europeans, I won't even call them Americans, because they were just English people, basically, like the white people in America, the settlers, yeah, exactly, colonists, here, the ones who were enslaving people, keeping people slaves. The Muslim Africans who were enslaved were so organized and so disciplined that most of the rebellions, most of the revolts, most of the times when enslaved Africans fought back, to free themselves, they were usually led by Muslim Africans. This happens so often, and there's books about this, but this happens so often that white people in America started telling the kidnappers, stop sending us Muslims. We don't want Muslim slaves anymore. This is too difficult, The others, they had better techniques to control them, but the Muslims had a vision. They wouldn't tolerate, being enslaved, because they knew that. Now, anyway, after generations, of course, that Islam is lost, over time. I mean, under generations of torture. But their descendants black people in America in the 20s, 30s, 40s, 1920s, 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, started reconnecting with Islam in very interesting ways. There were like Sunni Muslim, like Orthodox, Muslim preachers at that time. There were like very early Sunni communities. There were also some movements, that were focused more on black identity, but were building upon Islam or taking things from Islam and kind of mixing it with other things. But whatever it was, black Americans, even if they maybe they didn't identify as Americans. Malcolm X famously said, "I'm not an American. I'm a victim of Americanism." But anyway, black people in this land started to get familiar with Islam through different avenues. Around the same time, culminating into the same time that many of our parents or grandparents started coming to this country as well. Now, of our answers, if we're, speaking not as a non-black person, when our ancestors, came here, some of them had an affinity with black people here. They saw themselves in them. They saw a natural, they saw them as their people, They worshiped together, they worked together, they joined struggle with them. Others did not, and others, Muslim immigrants here, some of them just kind of wanted to become white and just kind of keep their head down, and they identified with the government or just wanted to not, be involved in any kind of resistance domestically. Like they were like, we left something bad. We're here for, economic opportunity. We're here for education, or we're here for, whatever civil rights we can get. And this becomes a split in the political approaches. I mean, there's the same split is in black politics in America between assimilation or integration and resistance. And Muslims also have this split between an integration, a compromising, and a resistance. In every generation you see this. We have imams on either side, And we can respect both positions. Sometimes this is a matter of ijtihad. But it's something that I hope, what we can do is discuss this in more detail. I think, inshallah, we're going to table some of this for tomorrow. But this split, when we come to an issue, we come to a point, we come to a head, as you get involved in Islamic social movement, in Islamic political work, as you come to an issue, like a crisis issue, like our moment right now with the war in Palestine, Of course, this has been a relatively continuous war, for almost 80 years, but of course, since October 7th, we have a new energy, for this. There's new urgency, for many of us here, because of just how savage, the Israelis have gotten, as a result. But as we approach these issues and as we activate, as we plug in, as we start working with others, as we start either joining organizations and movements, or as we start building alliances with others, or we build coalitions, or you're just looking personally and you're thinking with your family, like, where do I fit into all of this? Having a good sense of Islamic politics, how do Muslims do politics? How do Muslims deal with an issue like this? What are the options? Which option is better? That's how I'm going to put it. I'm not going to tell you that one way is always correct. Because in each generation, like I said, some imams suggested this, some suggested this. But inshallah, what we'll do moving forward is talk through how to make that judgment, and what that would mean, and how to build a program which is not American politics, not leftist politics, not rightist politics, but what's in Islamic politics for meeting the needs that we have today, for being useful in being a part of solving some of the crises, that we have today, for checking the enemies, that we have today. That's my intention, inshallah, moving forward. Let me pause for a moment. You guys have been very patient for an hour. I'm sorry for just lecturing. Let me pause and let's talk. I don't know if there's a way for people on live stream to ask questions, but if not, at least just ourselves. Let's have a discussion here. Anything I've said so far, or anything else that's on your mind. We'll pause here and then we'll leave some of this for tomorrow's inshallah. Okay? My time is yours. Anything on your minds? Anything that I said? Questions, comments, concerns, or criticisms? All welcome, based on what I said. Sir? Can you your name one more time, brother? Dawood.
Yeah, my grandfather, he was alive during that time.
Which time?
When the Ottoman.
Oh, yeah, 1924. Okay, yeah.
I think he was like 90 years.
MashaAllah. Yeah, okay. Yeah, MashaAllah. Sometimes these things sound like ancient history, but it's not. Like our grandparents, they witnessed such changes, Philistine, okay, Israel is established by the United Nations, or whatever. Do you know what year? Do you remember what year? 1948. 1948. So how many years? Math? 76, right? 76 years, more or less. Coming up on 76 years. When the Crusaders, heard of the Crusades, right? When the European Crusaders, these were Catholics, took Jerusalem, took Quds, in 1100s. It took the Muslims, I want to say 88 years? 88 years from its conquest until it was freed, liberated by Salahuddin. 88 years. Right? And the Muslims knew that this was important. The Muslims knew that it was a crisis. The Muslims worked towards it. There was multi-generational work went into bringing about a situation that Salahuddin could lead an army, and fix it, but I like keeping that in mind, because it's a reminder that, something being that far back in history doesn't mean it's over. It doesn't mean that it's too late now. It's done. Sometimes we hear this, that like one of the most famous imams in America, has just made this case that, he's been saying this for years, that, Khalifa, it's done now. Like, we're never going back. It's just, this is the way. It's too late now, Some people talk about Philistine that way, the Jews are going to be there till the end times. Like, but why? But why? Imagine if Salahuddin's teachers, had taught him that, it's done, just give it up, Let the Christians have it, It doesn't make any sense, No. Keep that historical vision helps. That's a great point.
I can't believe it. That doesn't seem like a lot of time. Like just 100 years, all of that happened. Like that seems kind of crazy.
Crazy.
It's hard to imagine. Just 100 years ago, like people thought the world was like ending.
Yeah.
Now it's like
still ending.
Yeah, but some people think like it goes on forever.
Yeah. That too, of course. No. And of course we believe in an end. We believe, the Quran and Allah in the Quran and the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, teach us, of course, that an end comes.
So what are your thoughts about, like in America? So you have like the defunding movement where a lot of rules that don't involve politics whatsoever.
Yeah.
To their curriculums, their teachings,
Yeah.
And then you have the liberal movement where it's like you all about the system without any Islamic substance. And so what do you say is a balanced version here? Like, do you think the number one what would you say is, you said in the beginning about priorities, what do you think the number one priority in America? Would you say is da'wah?
Yeah. Sure. Exactly. I mean, those are great examples of like these are, and I mean, I've totally benefited a lot from the Deobandi movement. You know, I think we all have, you know, in some way. I'm not, I don't want to like throw them under the bus, but, but exactly, my point is that the way that the best generations understood Islam, you know, was that there was no there was no division between, you know, the mission of our deen, like our Islamic mission and leadership. I mean, it was just assumed, right, that Muslims would have leadership over the place they lived in, right, and that they would maintain that and expand that zone as far as they could. The post-caliphate period makes it complicated because now we don't have a zone to expand. We have to like, Dar al-Islam has to kind of reconstitute itself as well. But for America, you know, I think, you know, we're on the frontiers. I mean, in a way, there's an argument to be made, you know, that I don't say, okay, I don't want, this is not a super tight analogy, but I think it's a useful thought exercise. When people talk about this as like, think about the Meccan period, you know, as kind of like a, because we don't have leadership of this land, you know. So the priorities then become education and dawah, you know, and working within kind of the system that does exist to try to protect, you know, our rights and interests as best as possible. I think that's a valuable thought exercise. It's a way of rooting Islamic work kind of in the Sira's paradigm. I think though also that it's not the Meccan period, obviously, like we're way past that also. You know, I think that American Muslims also would benefit from seeing themselves not as a national minority, but as part of a global majority and a global ummah, right? Reconnect with Muslims from around the world and be a part of the effort to unite us again, you know. Our goals for America in particular, I mean, we can have goals for the ummah as a whole, right? And then we can have goals for like, what's the best that we can hope for within America today. And it's important, if you have goals, you want to make sure those goals aren't working against each other. You know, you can fit them together. I think for America, yeah, I think dawah is key. I think education is key. And I think all kinds of preparation are key. You know, preparation means personal preparation, physical, financial, intellectual, family preparation, community preparation, which is organizing and development, building institutions, you know, building, so I'm going to jump ahead. We'll come back to this again tomorrow, but a focus of community level work. I think way before dealing with the government, like I usually like to pretend the government doesn't exist unless we have a problem with them. You know, way before that, you know, is thinking about how do we provide the services that we would want a government to provide. You know, think about what do the Muslims do? You know, they provided, you know, food, shelter, education. I mean, healthcare now, you know, would be one of those things. Security. Is that 5? You know, those things are things that a lot of people, Muslims and non-Muslims and our neighbors, unfortunately depend on the government for. And as long as we depend on the government for these very basic things, I mean, those are like the most basic things. I mean, if you have food and shelter, you're good. Like, but, you know, healthcare, education, security might be even more basic than those. If we depend on the government for those things, it will always be more difficult to free ourselves, you know, from that government, or to really meaningfully alter the relationship we have with the government. We depend on the police to secure ourselves. It's gonna be very hard to reform the police. I come from New York, so in New York we always have problems with the police. I don't know about down here. How much. There's a lot of police out here down there. I was trying to speed over here, and it was not possible. Like, there were a lot of police outside. But anyway, I have no idea. What you guys deal with. But the federal government. I know nationally we all deal with the plots of the federal agencies. Informants, entrapments, provocateurs, and surveillance, and things like this. The military. So developing those things, that's a priority, I would say. Before people trying to register us to vote and raise money for this candidate who's not going to do anything for us. Like, I think way before that. Like, let's build our own strength out. Like, let's be a force. I want our non-Muslim neighbors to know that if they need food, they can come to us. If they need shelter, they can come to us. If they need health care, they can come to us. If they need security. Some neighborhoods are like this. In New York, there were some neighborhoods that were like this. That were. I don't know if they are. I don't think they are still. There were communities that if there was a problem, even if it was like crime, like if there was a problem in the neighborhood, they would call the Muslims before the police. Sometimes the police are the problem. People call the Muslims to come and solve it. It's true. It sounds crazy, I know, in some areas, but it's true. I want our schools to be so good, that non-Muslims want to send their kids. The way non-Catholics go to Catholic school. I remember I had friends growing up who weren't Catholic. They went to Catholic school. They wear the plaid and the whole thing. But just because the Catholic school was better than the public school, in that area, non-Muslim parents would pay the Catholic Church, to send the kids to the Catholic school, and they would just say, okay, fine, you're going to learn some Catholicism, but whatever, just don't pay attention too closely. I want our schools to be so, excellent, that there's some examples of this, where non-Muslim parents are like, I'm going to send our kids to the Muslim school, they're going to take care of our kids and raise them up, right? I think these are better community priorities than some of the things that, for example, the liberal, kind of liberal political Muslims, are calling us to, which are things that usually just strengthen the state, they bleed power out of our community into just strengthening the state, a state which is really our biggest antagonist in the world today. We want to build our position, enough, that when we make a demand to the government like, okay, the government says, okay, we should probably take that seriously, Now, I think they laugh at us, we protest and, we convey how upset we are with American support for Israel, for example. And they don't care. They just don't care. We raise money for Congress people, not we, but I mean the we. People put up millions of dollars, hand it over to Congresswoman so and so, to do what? Like, I'm not convinced of that personally. I hope I've made clear I believe in politics. I believe like that we don't leave politics, But I think if we put all of these things in an order, there's a way to put it in an order, that gives us a strong position to do politics better. And it has to be informed by our ethics, as I said at the beginning. Ethics, goals, strategy. We have ethics for how we do things. We have a sense of what's right and wrong. We're not just going along with whatever our allies said. Okay, we have an ally that worked with us on one cause. Do we do then everything that they want to do? No, no, that's not how this works. We have ethics. We have a sense of right and wrong. We have a sense of goals. What do we want our society to look like? Like really, what do we want America to look like? What's the best case scenario? Not just even, that's a good thought exercise. That's something we take out the whiteboard, just envision it. It's not just how do we reform it, what would be an acceptable, tolerable, a way to live here, but like, what's the best we can imagine? What's the dream for America? You know, is it having like 4 Muslim Congress people? Like, no, come on, this is like, let's go bigger than that. You know, like what do we really want to see? What transformation do we want to see? And how would that come about? And then the strategy, then we build the strategy to get there. Yeah, what's up? Go.
A state that has like a Muslim mayor.
Yeah, a Muslim mayor. Yeah, that could have impact if it's the right, you know, with the right person. I mean, it's a step. It's a step, sure. I mean, life is different in Philadelphia, you know, than it is in, I don't know, some other city. Like, you know, having numbers, you know, helps. Having this is a ground up but it's a ground up transformation. You know, it's the mayor of Philadelphia isn't Muslim, but I mean, there's so many people, there's so many Muslims in Philadelphia, and Muslims have so much cultural power within the city, you know, that it's different. Like, you go around in Philadelphia, it feels like a Muslim country, you know, some ways. Portland? Is that right? Oh, funny, I don't know what. Cool. Yeah.
So as we know, like the Ottoman Empire was formed after Khalid Walid conquered Rome and the Persian Empire, right? So I wanted to ask, how was like the Ottoman Empire? How did it split up into more like little countries?
Oh, I see, okay.
Big empire.
Yeah. So there's a couple dynasties in between, first of all. But yes, you're right. You know, the Muslims expand. I'll do like a real big, quick version, kind of the history, and give you some names to like look more into. Muslims expand. We have the 4, or some might say the 5 Khalifa. You know, you have Abu Bakr, Omar, Uthman, Ali, Abi Talib, and then Hassan, you know, briefly. And then he reaches a agreement, you know, with Muawiyah, ibn Abu Sufyan. And from Muawiyah, you know, the leadership shifts, you know, to a hereditary. Muawiyah appoints his son, Yazid, you know, to be the leader, which causes a huge problem in the Muslim world. Maybe we could talk about that tomorrow. What's that?
Is that allowed? Like, I thought it was supposed to be like.
It was a bad look at the time, for sure. It was definitely it was something that really divided the ummah, and the Sahaba. Many of the Sahaba objected to this. Complicated. We could maybe we'll talk more about it tomorrow. Just to answer this question, it's just worth mentioning because the first dynasty after the Khulafa is called the Umayyad dynasty, the Bani Umayyah. You know, so the Umayyad dynasty is really the main up until really is the ruler, you know, of the Muslim world, of the Dar al-Islam, up until about 750. After which a new dynasty takes over, which is called the Abbasid dynasty, the Abbasid Caliphate, because they trace their lineage back to Abbas, the Prophet's uncle. So, the Abbasid Caliphate is what lasts up until the sacking of, it's the Abbasid Caliph, last Abbasid Caliph that is executed by the Mongols, 1200s. During the Abbasid Caliph, though, there starts to be a splitting. You know, now this is still 800 years ago, but there starts to be fracturing. You know, in Northern Africa and Spain, for example, it's a different dynasty. Like, I mean, it's a different ruler. You know, they also call themselves Umayyad because there's a splitting of that family. And from that point on, I think there's always usually more than one Muslim ruler at a time. But still, they're not nation states. They're not like, you know, small little countries. They're still regional rulers who are controlling like very large parts of Ummah. sometimes they'll outsource some of this control. Like under the Abbasids, there were like smaller rulers who still recognized the Khalifa as the Khalifa. Like they were like, that's our Imam, you know. But after the Abbasids, some of those subgroups, you know, take larger pieces of power. You know, you have from Salahuddin, you have the Ayyubid, you know, dynasty. It doesn't last so long. You have Turkic people coming in, you know, from Central Asia, who also, I mean, these are great fighters, very well organized, who also develop dynasties. The Seljuks, you know, are a famous one. And Ertugrul, you remember from Ertugrul, yeah. And it's out of that milieu that the Ottomans arise. The Ottomans are a Turk, you know, people. Usman is the kind of the founder, Ertugrul's son, you know. Usman is really the founder of this dynasty. And they rule, and I mean, these are the ones who open Constantinople, Istanbul, you know, which fulfills the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, you know, that, you know, one day you're gonna open Constantinople. I mean, like, Sahaba, I mean, they believed them, of course, but it was a huge thing, like, to imagine. Like, that was Rome. I mean, Muslims didn't enter Rome, Italy, you know, but Constantinople was the center of Rome. Like, it was the center of Rome, of the Roman Empire. The capital was Constantinople, which today is Istanbul, you know. So for the Muslims to take that in 1453 was huge. But when the Ottoman Empire, into the 1900s, so about 100 years ago, let's say about 110 years ago, you've heard of World War I?
Yeah.
Before World War II, obviously. Yeah. World War I, 1914 to 18. In World War I, it's not just a European thing. I mean, the Ottomans get involved, you know, for various reasons. I mean, the Ottomans at that time were not just Turkey. I mean, they had part of the Balkans, you know, into Southern Europe. You know, they had most of the Middle East, most of the Arab world. I mean, into the Arabian Peninsula. They had some of North Africa. I mean, before that, you know, the British and the French were starting to chop away at it a little bit. And the main thing was really colonialism. I mean, it was Europeans getting a military advantage, you know, chopping up pieces of North Africa, you know, taking that away from Muslim rule. Like Algeria, you know, the French took Algeria, controlled it for, you know, about 100 years. And Morocco and Tunisia, Libya, you know, well, Libya, I guess, was but West Africa also divided similarly, you know. The British, and then I think India, I mean, it was a different empire. The Mughal Empire was a totally different empire, but the British then get control of that. So colonialism, I mean, European militaries start taking pieces of it, separating pieces of it out. By World War I, the Ottomans join on the side of their allies, you know, the Germany. This is not Nazi Germany. This is before all that. But they join on the side of what they call the Central Powers. That side loses. The Ottomans lose this war. I mean, the British are running amok, you know, in the Muslim world. A famous example of this is Arab nationalism. I mean, the British exploited kind of Arab sentiments to convince and to support Arabs in rebelling against the Ottomans, you know, which is part of them losing the war. It's a famous movie called Lawrence of Arabia about a British intelligence officer named T.E. Lawrence. It's an old movie now, but it's an interesting one. It's about this story. I mean, it's about this chapter. He goes out and he meets some of the sharifs of the Arabian Peninsula, convinces them to rebel against the Ottomans. Anyway, long story short, by the end of World War One, the Ottoman Empire is basically forced to give up all of its territories. So the Arab world, especially, I mean, after World War One, Turks fight to get at least what's now Turkey. They fight for that much, but they're not really able to go beyond that. And the British and the French divide Palestine, what's now Jordan, Syria, Lebanon, Iraq. What becomes Saudi Arabia, they leave to the Saudi family, but Egypt is British. Again, North Africa is still all kind of chopped up. So really, you're looking at the heart of the Muslim world there. South Asia, like Hindustan, India, what's now India, Pakistan, and Bangladesh, are under British control. Disaster. It's a disaster, In the decades after that, and they split it up, into these little things. Like, so Egypt becomes its own little country. It's under British control, but it's a country. Syria, it used to be part of Greater Sham and whatever, but these borders were drawn. Like, literally, the English and the French had a map called the Sykes-Picot Agreement, where they just divided it up. They say, we'll take this, I'll take this, you take this, I'll take this. They literally drew these lines on a map. And then they set up local elites. They set up people locally to become the governors of it, So they would put a Syrian in charge of Syria, and they put an Egyptian in charge of Egypt. And then eventually, piece by piece, these countries would try to get free. They'll try to, some of them fought for their freedom. Sometimes the British just kind of gave up and left, with the French. But after extracting everything that they wanted. But those borders stayed. When the national elites would free up, when they would finally get free, an elite class would say, you know what, we're not going to join up with our neighbor. Like, well, let's keep the power that we have, There was a couple efforts, and pan-Arabism at certain times was really a leftist phenomenon. I mean, unfortunately.
So would they so would the Arab countries ever would they
come back together?
Come back together?
Right. I mean, and this is interesting. I mean, there was a point at which I think that was the vision. I mean, Muslims had that vision at certain points. My point is, and I think, and the way I understand Islam from my teachers, is that we should all have that vision. I mean, we should all hope for that reunification. There were also non-Muslims, or people who, like, Islam wasn't their priority. They wanted to unite the Arab world under, like, communism or, like, Marxism and stuff. Like, different thing. I mean, but I think as Muslims, we also should have that vision and that hope, that goal and that strategy, to bring us all back together. I think that's very much my point. Yeah, exactly. But we have a lot of work to do, and I'll find, and unfortunately, we find that the biggest obstacles to that kind of unity are the rulers of the countries. Because they're the people who feel that they have something to lose. And so when movements arise that look beyond the country, to bring multiple peoples together across borders, those movements seem the most dangerous, to the rulers. And I think, like, when I think back on, like, I look at the history of the Deobandi movements, and some of these, like, in South Asia, a number of the movements, even some of the Arab movements that tried to, like, leave politics aside, sometimes it was just survival. I think it was under certain regimes. Some people, I think some of the movements, they would just say, we're not going to do politics because we just want to focus on education. We just want to focus on dawah. We just want to focus on this, because we know if we get into politics, the government's going to crack down on us. We can question the judgment from here, but I mean, whatever. That's not the point. The point is, for us today, for you and I, for looking today, and for our families and our communities and our ummah across the world, how might we move forward?
Yeah. You think, like, there's a time when the Muslims will, like, get back together, because, like, isn't there, like, a hadith where all the Muslims will come under either Mahdi or Isa to fight against like.
Absolutely, and we believe that. Yeah, of course, absolutely, we accept that. I think the only question is, do we have to wait for that? I think this is the question that's sometimes debated, and sometimes the like, more fatalistic kind of preachers, say, oh, when the Mahdi comes, we'll work it out. Let's just focus on something else for now. I just don't like that. That doesn't seem to me the way that the Sahaba and better generations of Muslims understood their role. So that's a great question. That's a perfect question, and you answered it yourself. But I think that's exactly my point. Is that we can have a bigger vision. We have to prepare the way, for that Mahdi. We want to make ourselves useful to him. Like we want to, if he comes in our lifetimes, we want to be with him. We want to be part of that. But yeah, it could be sometimes that narrative is used as just kind of like I guess you call it fatalism. Like it's just like it's gonna happen anyway, and it's not gonna happen without him, so we're just not gonna deal with it right now, I don't think that's appropriate. Yeah, absolutely. I think we should have a good opinion, of Allah. We have a good opinion of ourselves. We should know our strength, of course, know our weaknesses, but know our strength, and try to use that, for the highest cause. Yeah. No, yeah, inshallah. We call it for the night, and then tomorrow. I hope you guys will be here tomorrow. We have plenty more to talk about, inshallah. So I guess you guys are locked inside, huh? I'll be very happy to come back tomorrow, inshallah. Spend more time. I'll come with less of a lecture. I'll have a couple more things we can talk through just to get us started again, and then we can spend more time, just kind of discussing what you guys want, inshallah. But, whatever you guys want, whatever's useful for you, inshallah. At your service. Okay. Thank you.
Back in the summer?
And I'll come back in the summer, inshallah. I mean, I would love to come back down here. Usually, my family is kind of split between Northeast, like New York, New Jersey, and then California.